Heroes. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Folks, welcome inside the Paris Palace High above 2919 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show on KEVT, Power Talk 1210 AM, Sahuarita, Tucson. Thank you so much for being part of the program today. And it's my honor now to bring in one of the most gifted percussionists. Great time feel. He's played with a bunch of Titans. I think he kind of dropped out of the studio scene and the scene in general for a while when things started to go a little bit out to sea, but you're not going to find a more prolific swinger drummer than my guest, Barry Altschul. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Barry, I want to ask you right off the bat, can you talk about Kenny Clark as the bridge to a new era of drumming? I mean, did Kenny Clark have an impact on you?
Certainly. Matter of fact, the only drummers that truly had an impact on me were from the bop and hard bop era. So Kluk was, he decided to put more time on the cymbals so he could play freer with his bass drum, which gave everything a whole other feeling and attitude, actually. So he took from swing drumming, he created the bebop drumming. And then Max kind of put the polish on it more.
Can you, for the non-musician out there, I just want to read you a quote I transcribed. Barry has been seeing my transcriptions of my interviews. Bill Crow, the bass player, said regarding Kenny Clark, he couldn't play the bass drum that fast. He didn't really have chops to execute things as well. He used a lot of rebound. He wasn't a trained technician. He heard the music in a wonderful dancey way. He figured out that if you left the 4/4 out of the bass drum and used it for accents and put the time on the ride cymbal, then you could hear the bass player and the piano chords better. He didn't have to work so hard. As soon as the other drummers saw what he was doing, Max Roach took it to another level, Roy Haynes. I
can agree with all that.
Can you talk about, I guess what I'm saying, up to that point, where were you at when you first heard Kenny Clark doing the rebound?
In the 50s, listening to Miles, on the Miles record that Kluk was playing on. I think it was on Prestige.
Right.
That's when I first heard the bass drum being played other than kind of a Gene Krupa-y way, which was like 4 on the floor pretty much there. As a matter of fact, Papa Joe once told me that he and the bass player used to deal with tuning the drum note so it would correspond with the bass in a certain way while they kept that 4 on the floor. He said you could recognize drummers by their bass drum sound.
I dig. And at that point, Barry Altschul, born in New York City in the bastion of bop, bebop, hard bop, post bop, you were making up your own rhythms. I mean, you did not have a formal teacher growing up. Is that right?
No, not really. I learned how to hold sticks and play some rudiments in the Bronx house. It was a music program for people who didn't really have that much money. And so I learned some rudiments and practiced on tin cans. And then when I was about, 18, 19 years old, I became friendly with Charlie Persip and did some formal studies with him. And then when I was already playing with Chick, I took some lessons with Sam Ulano to get my reading abilities better. But otherwise, no, I didn't really have, altogether, it must have been in my life, 18 months, 2 years of formal study. The rest has been on my own.
And that's why I love coveting cats like like you, because like if you can follow this here, you know, you go to music school today, Hart Music School, Berkeley School of Music. There are books out on every drummer. You got to try to play like this. You got to master this. You got to master this. Here you are just listening and learning on your own. And then someone like Kenny Clark comes in. I mean, at the time, you didn't even know that it was a bridge to a new
That's right.
rhythm.
That's right.
I mean, can you talk about how liberating it was to learn on your own, even before Persip, just the liberation and the freedom of I mean, because when I hear you play, you're playing melodically, and it's liberating, and it's not 4/4, and it's intoxicating. Can you talk about that liberating feeling of not having books shoved in your face, and then having cats come along that were making history, and you didn't even know it at the time?
Well, when I was young, the guys I was listening to, when I started listening, I knew that they were great at the time. I mean, my influences were like Art Blakey and Philly Joe and Max and Roy, Elvin and Tony. It stopped there. After that, I was already playing with Paul Bley, and he actually said something to me. He said, maybe it's time you stop listening to other people's stuff and get into your own stuff. Though I might have been playing my own stuff all the time. I don't know.
What can you go? I mean, for the non-musician, because certainly the people in the audience listening they're not all I'm not a musician. Did he extrapolate on what was he saying? You were just you've got all the rudiments. You have.
You mean what Blay said? No, I see. At the time, I was carrying around those portable phonographs with a bunch of Coltrane records and stuff like that, and I was spending my time listening to all this. And what I played with Blay actually really didn't. What I was listening to didn't really translate to what I had to play with Blay at that time of what he was dealing with musically, and so I guess he felt that I had the potential of coming into my own, and it was time that I started to think that way.
And so Charlie Persip was one of your early mentors. He was one of the early guests on the Jake Feinberg show. I'm curious, was he able to hip you to some gigs? Did he recommend you for any gigs?
No. There was a very embarrassing moment I had, though. Well, I was an arrogant kid from the Bronx, and I was brought up in the South Bronx in a very multicultural environment, and I thought I was really playing when I was studying with Persip, and one day I asked him if I could sit in on one of his gigs. I won't tell you with who or where. Make it too embarrassing. But before the first chorus was finished, one of the guys in the band whistled, stopped the band, turned around to me and said, "Get the fuck off the bandstand, but come back when you can play." If he wouldn't have said that, I would have given up.
Hey, a couple things. Number one, don't worry about it. We are on live radio.
Oh, the cursing. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, it adds to the punch.
Okay.
So if he did not add, come back when you learn how to play, you might have quit.
I was so crushed.
Yeah.
That I might have. I don't know, because that didn't happen, but I was very depressed. But what I did do was go back and really start to practice hard. I was starting to practice for 8-10 hours a day. I think I did that for a couple of years.
And then, so that was a humbling experience. I guess besides I mean, you were already practicing, but in your mind, if you can look back on it, were you just, why did you not cut the mustard at that time? You just couldn't.
I wasn't ready. That's all. I just wasn't ready. That's what I said. I was too arrogant.
Right.
I wasn't at the level that these people were. I mean, not even at the bottom of the level where I could have just skated by.
Absolutely. But at the same time, practicing's only you can woodshed only so much. Could you talk about the first gig that you had where nobody walked off the bandstand?
Oh, well, that was even before then.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I was playing little gigs in the Bronx with Bronx Cats, and we were all developing at the time. One of the guys, his name is Frank Mitchell, who went on to be with Art Blakey for a while and got killed, so he couldn't really continue in his career. He died when he was in his early 20s. But he was already with Art Blakey at the time. There was this pianist named Jimmy Hunter, who at 18 years old became the musical director of Harry Belafonte, and he died in a fire. One of the early bass players that was a wonderful jazz player was Jerry Jamot.
Oh,
he was
wow.
from the neighborhood.
Jerry.
And then he discovered the Fender bass, and he changed his whole thing.
Dude, I cannot put, so, I mean, all I want to see is Jerry Jamot on an upright bass. I can't believe that he was swinging that thing so hard. No,
Man, he was the cat. He was the cat at his age at that time.
Did you ever jam at that time with Ray Mantilla?
No, Ray was a little older.
He was a little bit old. Yes, is that?
Yeah, but we've become very good friends over the years.
You know, I guess what I'm getting at is like, okay, so you get up on the bandstand, you're a little bit arrogant. You know, they tell you to get up.
Excuse me. The first big time gig I had,
that's it, yeah.
where I was kind of on my own. We opened Slugs. Me, Paul Bley, Dave Eisenson, and myself. Dave Eisenson was friendly with Jerry Schultz, who was the owner of Slugs. He lived next door to him, and persuaded Jerry to try music. And we were the first gig there. So that was the first time I was really able to feel more myself, because it was the first time I played freer music. That time, I wasn't listening to any contemporary free improvisation, whether it would be from a jazz point of view, like Cecil Taylor and those cats, or from a classical point of view. I was listening to Coltrane, you know, and Miles and all that kind of stuff. And when Paul Bley asked me for that gig, on the gig, he said, "You want to play some standards, or you want to play some music I'm into?" Again, being arrogant, I said, "Play what you want."
Right.
And I just responded to what he was playing, and it seemed to work.
Do we have analog cassettes of those shows? I mean, do you have any copies of that early Altschul playing free?
Oh, I have cassettes of it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think we need to. This should be a project, man. Let's get this stuff. I guess here's the point for younger people out there. What you're saying is Bley was channeling some of his own free improvisation, but
that's right.
You were not listening to any free music at the time. You were listening to modal hard bop. Is that right?
Not just modal hard bop. I was listening to changes, time and changes, and I was listening to the history of jazz up until the point that free music started.
What was the point that free music? This is so important. When is that? When would you demarcate that?
I would say that. Well. First of all, publicly, I guess with Ornette coming to town. But before that, there was some stuff going on in California with Ornette and Bley and so on, experimenting with more open music. Then there was also the Jimmy Giuffre thing. But I didn't know about any of that stuff. I didn't know about Cecil Taylor. I didn't know about Albert, nothing. I got all of that when I started playing with Bley.
I dig. Well, you segued beautifully. We got a name on this program called a game called Name That Tune. I want to play this piece of music for you for a couple minutes, and we'll come back and break it down, okay?
Okay.
Music on the Jake Feinberg Show, brought to you by the Circle Tree Ranch, the Jewish Community Center of Southern Arizona, the Stereo Hospital, Abbott Taylor Jewelers, and Craig Pretzinger of Allstate Insurance. All right, Mr. Altschul, what do you got for us, brother?
Well, from the album Scorpio, Dave Holland, Paul Bley, myself. I'm terrible with names of tunes, but that might be Around Again or something like that.
You're almost there, but I'm proud that you nailed it. I found a tattered copy of this in a thrift store recently. The name of that tune, Syndrome.
Syndrome, right? Okay, but it's from the Scorpio album, correct?
Absolutely, on Scorpio with Paul Bley and we just
Dave Holland
and Dave Holland and can you just talk to the audience, Barry, about two-part question. Paul Bley, rest in peace. We just lost him. Can you talk about the significance of Bley that might fly below the radar for most people that have chronicled him, and then also the language and how you guys were communicating on that tune specifically? Because my engineer, who's a horn player, was laughing because he's on all these ARP synths and playing all this Moog stuff, but really it sounds like you guys are channeling you're going up to Neptune or something. Can you break those two things down?
Well, Paul was one of the first people to get a Moog synthesizer from Robert Moog, and was experimenting with it for a number of years. That particular tune would be what I would consider some more or less inside playing of Paul Bley.
Absolutely.
Whatever he was doing with stretching the notes and bending the notes and so on, because it was pretty strict. It was a swinging, in time-ish kind of thing. Some of his other music was totally out. Than that, there was no rhythmic structure, there was no melodic structure or harmonic structure. It was just pure, spontaneous improvisation. But with this, communication in the jazz world, and especially with playing music that has less of the standard rules in them. Let me put it that way. Your communication is more ESP-ish than people telling you what they want you to play.
How much of that? That was so prevalent at the time. Talk about the contemporary scene. I mean, do you play with a lot of ESP players today? Is there a scene?
No, I don't mean ESP from a label point of view, if that's what you say.
No, I'm talking about telepathy. I know what you're getting at.
Yeah, right. Yes, I do.
Can you talk about today? Because I guess what I'm getting at is like getting outside of rhythmic structure, rhythmic patterns. I mean, this is like scary stuff for people that are technically proficient on their instrument. You put them outside in the free world, and they're losing their minds. And I feel,
right. Well, I found nowadays, the musicians, let's say, under 40, have incorporated much of the freer music discoveries in their playing. There's moments that they go free. There's moments that they're in time. I mean, the younger musicians that are truly playing. I agree with. I heard your program with Odeon.
Yes.
And I agree with what he says a lot about what happens, the difference between learning some street stuff as opposed to just winning a contest, coming out of school, and becoming a band leader.
Right.
I agree with him about that. But there are a few that came out of that education system. First of all, most of them can play their asses off. They got technique down. They know how to play all kinds of time and changes and stuff like that. But there's a few who could. One that comes to mind is someone I've been associated with recently is John Erabagon.
Mm-hmm.
He's about 36 years old now, and he is. He feels great when he plays, and he's very into intuitive playing, as well as being very proficient in time and changes.
Yeah, that's like my age. So my hope and prayer is that I'm 37. So you're talking about a pretty intuitive player at 36. My hope is that my Gen X generation, maybe a little bit younger, can bring some of that good feeling back into playing. Because and it's not really the fault of any musicians. It's just the rampant assault of digital music being slammed into people's ears. They've gotten used to this just electronic drum track, and it's really to me, it's really hindered the language of all musical genres.
Well, I don't know. You're talking more about commercial music, or are you talking about improvised music?
Well, I consider now. I don't know how much airplay Syndrome got in 1973, but.
Oh, not much, I'm sure.
No, but I mean, a lot of pop music in the early 70s was very palatable to me because it felt good. Even the jazz, or what you might consider, I hate the word fusion, but, that stuff was popular music mainly because of freeform radio. Now you have pop music that's all electronically enhanced.
Okay, I understand what you're saying.
You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Well, of course, that takes a lot of things out of the music, which is more of a esoteric, spiritual nature than a musically technical nature. I mean, you take a certain human quality out of the music when it's all electronic. When people send in tracks and don't have to show up to play in the studio.
That's right.
Stuff like that. And it's there's a certain spontaneity of and level of consciousness that's lost, I think, when that happens.
Can you talk about accessing a different level of consciousness with Circle, with Chick and Holland? Can you point to a time when you guys transcended based on just no verbal interaction on the bandstand? I think this is just absolutely vital for future generations.
Can I pinpoint the moment?
Anything that comes to mind where what you're talking about, like, okay, so
we started trying to develop that from the very first moment we played together. The first thing that happened, really, even before Anthony joined the band, was me and Chick got together and figured out a drum sound, a way for me to tune my drums, where I can play how I wanted to, whether it would be busy or not busy. And what I would be playing would not interfere with the distinctness of the piano and the bass.
Unbelievable.
And so we found that. After that, we just played. And from what we improvised, certain compositions came out of that we could either keep to or not when we played. Most of the compositions we played did not have changes, so we did not have to keep to that particular type of form. Though we did play a couple of standard tunes in our way and didn't really have to keep the form in that either.
I love it. But that, can you just paint that picture? Would Chick get on the drum kit and sort of work and show you what he wanted?
No, he didn't ever show me anything he wanted as far as what I played was concerned. The only thing we talked about, but that's the reason why they asked me to play with them in the first place, because they knew how I played and they knew I would fit in what they wanted to do. I was never by anybody that I played with, for that matter. Paul Bley, Chick, Sam Rivers, any of those people never told me what to play. They didn't even tell me how to play. Sam Rivers just said to me one thing in all the years: keep the energy up. That's it.
This is fascinating stuff. You've been part of so many seminal albums. Quite honestly, some of the tunes that you play on are so free. Like my ear is still. I played that Syndrome piece because to me it was the most straight ahead piece.
Me too. It was the most straight ahead piece for me too. When I just heard it now, I said, "Oh, that's pretty straight ahead for Blake at that period."
He had the pipe in his. You went out to. How often did you get out to the? Because I think that was cut out in the Bay Area. How often did you get out to the Bay Area to play?
That wasn't cut in the Bay Area. That was cut in New York.
Really? Because it was on Fantasy Records. I guess it was cut somewhere. That's interesting because it came out in '73 and it came out.
Fantasy. It came out on Fantasy, is what you're saying?
Yeah, it was pressed on. It was.
Well, that's all in Cheap News. He was everywhere.
That's true.
We didn't have to go out there for it to be released on Fantasy.
How did you went to Slugs and was that where Chick knew how you played, or did you have a gig?
Oh no, this was years before. I was already playing with Paul Bley. Let's see, 4 years before I started playing with Chick.
4 years, exactly. So
I started playing with Bley in '64, and I started playing with Chick in '69. He was still with Miles at the time.
So, can you talk a little bit about the tour? Did you make an album with Bley before you joined Chick?
Maybe 15.
15.
I'm on about 30 albums with Paul Bley.
Unbelievable. That is And when was the last time you saw? Did you get a chance to connect with Paul before he passed?
No. No, we haven't been in touch for the last few years.
Barry, how do you go about? Well, what do you think was the most valuable mentoring lesson you got from Charlie, and how do you? Can you give an example of how you mentor people you play with or teach today?
Charlie showed me that jazz just wasn't a form. It was a way of life. Let me put it to you that way.
Can you go deeper on that?
Well, most jazz musicians I know are totally engrossed. They consider themselves having careers and working and so on because they have to support themselves and their families. But most I know are just pure music. I mean, if they couldn't play, they'd go literally crazy.
Right.
So, and also up through the history up until the very self-destructive period, jazz was also a lifestyle. And it had its own language. Matter of fact, the jazz language has now been put into everyday Webster-type English. I mean, the word jig.
Right.
I mean, they use it on the news talking about each other's work. I mean, that was a word that was used, started in the black community, as long as the word dig and cool and hip and all these words that are used today to keep what they wanted to talk about to themselves. Because white people didn't know those terms. That was black slang, so to speak. And so if someone had a gig with someone and didn't want this other person to hear, they would say, "I got this gig," and so on and so forth. So it was a lifestyle. It was a way of life, and it's become a part of the culture of America, jazz. So it's more than just a career.
Can you talk about I definitely want to do part 2 with you very soon, but I wanted you to promote what you were doing, what your plan was for this year, any projects or just inner desires for Barry Altschul to keep growing on the drum kit and as a human being.
two statements, yes, absolutely. I still want to grow on the drum kit and as a human being. But I do have some projects. I'm involved in my trio, which is called the Three Dumb Factor, and it's with Joe Fonda playing bass and John Erabagon playing saxophones, and we have a couple of tours coming up this year. I'm also involved in a project of John Erabagon's with Mark Elias as the the bassist, and there's and he has a couple of tours lined up. I'm also involved in a new project called the OGJB Quartet, which is Oliver Lake, Graham Haynes, Joe Fonda, and myself. It's a fairly new quartet. We've just had a couple of gigs, but we have an agent trying to get us some more, and so that's another project. I'm also getting involved in maybe my book of mine, as well as writing some music, and hope to record. And there's a rumor, I guess maybe I could start the buzz. There's a rumor that some old circle tapes were found and may be released. Never before.
Never before. And before I let you go, how many of these tours are in the United States?
Maybe one.
Right. All right. We got to pick it up in part 2. I love you, Batchel.
Okay, thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, listen.
Enjoyed doing this.
Keep swinging, man.
Okay,
All right.
care.
All right. We'll be right back on the Jake Feinberg Show.